The shortcuts of Hollow Bastion. What makes a Kingdom Hearts world one of your favorites? Maybe it's the memorable cutscenes or the exciting boss fights. For me, it's the interesting world design and rewarding exploration. Traverse Town, Agrabah, and Wonderland have interwoven layouts where rooms have multiple entrances, letting you take unique routes through the worlds once you gain more movement options and learn the lay of the land. With a little finesse, you could even reach some chests and areas earlier than a new player would, taking a shortcut to them if you will. And Hollow Bastion has my vote for the most compelling possible shortcuts in the entire game. By the time you visit this world, Sora has a ton of tools that can be used to navigate the environment. With most summons, high jump, and glide available, the world has several entrances and chests open for the player to attempt to reach. You could even hypothetically skip entire rooms and fights. So let's deep dive into some of these possible shortcuts to see what works, what's got potential, and what's impossible, looking at the Final Mix HD version of the game. I think it makes sense to start out with an actual shortcut to get an idea of what's possible. This one is so efficient, it's even used in speedruns. Dumbo Skip. If you couldn't tell from the name, it uses the Dumbo summon, specifically his ability to sorta fly. When summoned, you can use the flying controls from Neverland, just with a height limit, and needing solid ground below you. This trick takes place on our second visit to Hollow Bastion, when we're racing back to the keyhole. The intended route is to go through the castle, come back outside, and get to the elevator switch. But this is the same castle gates room we were just in. It'd be faster to just go straight to the switch. Sora can't make the jump across from the ground, and he can't easily jump onto any terrain to gain extra height. That's where Dumby comes in with his pseudo fly. If we summon him near the first arch, we can ride him to his peak and dismiss against the side of it. Sora jumps off of him and is able to grab the ledge at the top so we can climb up. From here, we can now glide over to the switch and skip going through the castle. There's even a path through the air that can avoid spawning enemies, letting you skip that mob fight as well. A really neat use for a summon outside of combat. But this isn't the only Dumbo Skip. A little later in the world, you can take the elevator from the Great Crest to the High Tower. And you might notice the High Tower area also has several entrances. We'd normally enter this door to the lift stop, and come out on the other side where you'd hit some switches and platform to get to this entrance on the ledge. But Dumbo comes to our rescue again. Summoning and riding him to his peak, we can get near the ledge and dismiss him. Sora grabs the ledge and we skip going through the castle and fighting Heartless. This trick can actually be used in both visits to the world, since you'll have a full party both times we're here. This one is a little harder since you have to position at the right spot in the air before you dismiss, but it saves a ton of time from fighting enemies and hitting the switches. Give these tricks a try next time you're on the game. They're really satisfying and beginner friendly. Great examples of the movement possibilities this game has. But oddly, they're also the only actual shortcuts in Hollow Bastion as of now. The rest are just hypothetical, that either need testing or something to be discovered in order for them to work. This will be my analysis of the shortcuts, and if I'm not able to find a solution, hopefully this information is helpful for somebody else to figure them out. So let's blast through them in chronological order. For this first potential shortcut, we'll be trying to skip the intended route of going through the waterway to unlock the front door, and fight Riku during the first visit to the world. At this point in the game, Sora lost the Keyblade to Riku, so we've only got a wooden sword and Beast in our party. The main idea for this is to try and get to the door across the gap in the castle gates area. Going through it takes us to the lift stop, then to the entrance hall where the fight takes place. So maybe we could start the fight from here. Like we went over with Dumbo Skip, we can't easily jump across, and 2 party members are needed in order to summon Dumbo, so we can't use him to get across. But there is another way, using this gate. Walking near it makes it open for us to go through, and nearby there's some platforms. From on top of them, we can make a precise jump, and with enough height and the right angle, glide and sort of ride on one of the gates, moving us close enough to the arch to grab on and pull ourselves up top. From here, we can grab these chests at the earliest point possible, but we can also glide over to the other arch and across the gap to the door. Now that we're here, let's check the switch for the elevator to see if it's possible to just completely skip the fight. Unfortunately, it's turned off for now. So let's go through the door. No enemies spawn on this side of the gap or in the lift stop room, since you wouldn't normally be over here. And entering the entrance hall, the cutscene before the Riku fight doesn't play. The emblem door blocks the way we came from, and we can see the bars blocking this area like during the fight. There's no collision from this side, so we can take a one-way trip into the room. And now, we see that the room is in the arena state from the Riku fight, except it's only us and Beast. All doors in the room are blocked by invisible walls, so there's no escape. It's neat to see, but resetting the game is the only way out. Out of curiosity, I checked what would happen if we enter the entrance hall from the front door, but from out of bounds, to see if it'd be worth looking for a way to clip out of bounds. It gets us into the room, but it's in the same arena state as before, so I'm declaring it impossible to skip hitting the waterway switch. I even tested both of these entrances after activating the switch, and nothing changes. You're required to unlock the front door, then approach it from the outside, which starts the cutscene and Riku fight. So the only shortcut here would be to the higher up chest, or an Orichalcum and Haste 2 gummy block earlier. While we didn't find anything super useful, I think this is a good showcase of how well structured KH1 is. Some triggers for fights and cutscenes are really specific, but let's put a positive spin on this with a fun fact I found during testing. Did you ever wonder what these switches in the corners of the waterway were for? I spent hours trying to find some secret combination to them as a kid. Well, turns out, they don't do anything. Using a mod I was able to reach them, and there was no prompt to hit them. They're just for decoration, at least in this version of the game. So you don't have to think about those ever again now. But we've got a few more areas to explore, so let's keep moving. This one I'm calling Library Skip. A normal playthrough would have you beat Riku in the entrance hall, then afterwards go through the library to do the book puzzle, and exit the library to the second floor of the entrance hall, where you get the emblem pieces and open the emblem door. The idea here is to skip going through the library, and just find a way up to the top of the entrance hall, since it's all one room. Just to cover our bases, if you try to go back and do Dumbo Skip right now, the elevator switch in the castle gates area is still turned off. The cutscene from completing the emblem door is actually what activates it, so we definitely need those pieces. Back to the entrance hall, after the fight with Riku, we're left in the room with no enemies spawning, and it seems unlikely we'll be able to reach anything above. We can't even try summoning Dumbo since you have to be in combat with a red command menu to use summons. Unless there's a hidden, untextured ledger platform somewhere, there isn't a way to get up there right now. So let's rewind a little to during the Riku fight. We can try Dumbo now, and it looks like our best bet is to try and grab onto the center platform. Unfortunately, we're just a little too short to reach it. This part of the fountain below doesn't seem to let Dumbo fly above it since it isn't really solid ground. If it did, this might actually be possible. None of Riku's attacks hit us into the air either. So for now, there isn't a way up there. But would it even be worth it to find a way up during the fight? We're able to collect 2 pieces of the emblem during the fight, from breaking the pots and lighting the candles, and we can spawn a chest containing the 3rd piece by pushing this statue. The only issue we run into is with the 4th piece, where a red trinity is required. During combat, we're unable to use any trinity mark, so we can't even collect every piece during the fight, but I did find something promising. This rock with a lightning bolt on it. Hitting it with a thunder spell activates the moving platforms in the center of the room. Cool. They raise and lower to the ground floor and back. If we activate these during the fight, they freeze in whatever spot they were once we beat Riku, so we can use them to jump up to the 2nd floor. Even if they end up in a less than ideal spot, we can leave the room and come back, and they'll start moving again. With that, we have an easy way to get back up and collect the pieces. So let's try and figure out a way to hit this rock. Just standing or jumping below it and spamming thunder doesn't hit it. Even locking onto the rock from the 1st floor doesn't work. So it doesn't seem to be based on a part of the thunder spell hitting it, but rather Sora's position. After some testing, my conclusion is that Sora's feet have to be at or above the bottom of the rock when casting thunder in order for it to activate. As you can see here, Sora is floating just below the 2nd floor. Using thunder won't activate the switch, but as soon as we go slightly higher, it works. This is likely the case so that people didn't accidentally activate the platforms during the Riku boss fight. So while the platforms did have promise, we're back to square one. If there was some way up here, We can skip going through the library entirely, but for now, this is just a potential shortcut. A fun fact about this area, if you get to the second floor of the entrance hall and skip the library, the second floor library door was never unlocked. So entering the library from here, you'll see it's still locked even though we just used it. But we can just jump back down to the first floor door to leave. There was a lot of promise here, and it feels like we're really close to something. But since we can't skip this now, let's just gather the emblem pieces and move on. Next, we'll be looking at a pretty simple room, the Great Crest. This area is most memorable for having us ride across a huge gap in a lift with a mob fight halfway through. After that, the player would go through the lift stop to come out on the second floor of the Great Crest area and take a lift up to the high tower. As you can see, all of this takes place in one large space. We can even jump from the second floor and glide over to the first lift. So if there is a way to get across this gap, we could skip the entire lift ride. First things first, we can't just jump and glide across. Even with Super Glide, we'll come up short no matter where on the platform we jump from. It looks like the architecture has some room for us to stand or grab onto, but it's actually just invisible walls. No enemies spawn besides on the lift ride, so summons aren't usable for this either. There haven't been any invisible ledges or platforms found along the wall to help us get across either. And inside the elevator also seems pretty secure, with no ways to clip out of it early. The shortcut is so simple, yet we just don't have a way to make it across. So this is unfortunately still just a potential shortcut. Like Library Skip, held back by our jumping height. If there was some method found in the future to just jump a little higher, both this and Library Skip would save us some time. But for now, we're stuck riding across. Since this was a pretty quick one, let's do a fun fact double feature. The spawn point for the enemies in the elevator fight is always at this point in the air, even without the lift. So if we glide over, we'll see the Heartless spawn in. If you turn off Encounter Plus, you can actually make a few trips through the air to defeat all the enemies, since the spawn stays consistent when you travel through loading zones. After they're gone, you can take the elevator across, and it will stop for the fight. But since you already defeated the Heartless, the switch to continue the ride will immediately spawn. Fun fact number 2 comes after we get off the lift. You can look at it return across the gap to its starting point, and we can't follow it even with Super Glide. But if we use gaming magic to fly across, we'll see that the switch to get on the lift initially is gone and just the light's there. We can interact with it, but nothing will happen until the elevator comes back. Once it does, we can ride it back across. But if we time it well and hit the switch right as the lift is returning, it'll start to move back across the gap without us. But the crazy thing is that when it gets back across, we get teleported to the exit spot even if we weren't on it. No matter what we're doing or where, it moves us there. I'm not sure what to do with that information, but it's really interesting and makes me wonder if it's possible for a trick to be found in the future that would move us across and skip the mob fight entirely. But for now, all of these Great Crest ideas are just potential shortcuts. And that brings us to our last stop, an idea that may completely skip all fights with the Mistress of Evil, Maleficent. Once we take the lift from the Great Crest to the High Tower, we'll either do Dumbo Skip or the normal High Tower puzzle, and be a short path from the Maleficent boss fights. After that, a new door in the Castle Chapel will appear that we can take to the lift stop, then to the Grand Hall where we fight Riku Ansem. But there's something strange here. Most paths in the lift stop are blocked off with visible walls. But the short path from the Castle Chapel to the Great Hall has a ledge that drops down to a lower area, the area we enter from the High Tower. So if we could find some way up here, we could enter the Grand Hall before the Maleficent fight, maybe letting us skip straight to Riku. There's no easy way to just hop up. And before searching too hard for a natural way up, I just flew up to check if this was actually possible. With that, we can go through the Grand Hall door and see if there's potential. Then something weird happens. The cutscene that would normally play the first time we enter the Castle Chapel starts. And after it's done, or you skip it, we're moved to the Castle Chapel, even though we just entered the Grand Hall door. If we backtrack and re-enter the Grand Hall again, we see the room with the doors closed, and no Sora, Donald, or Goofy. We're able to move and the camera zooms through the door, instead of the door opening. we can move around and notice we aren't just controlling some invisible camera. We're actually controlling Sora, but he's invisible. I was able to get Sora to appear by going to first person camera, then back to third. Now we can explore the room like normal, and see it's in the same state from the cutscene we just watched. Unfortunately, that means that there are no chests for us to grab early, and we can't progress anything. So this is impossible. But what happens if we go into the Maleficent fight? Entering that door instead of the Grand Hall early, Sora is made completely invisible, just like in the Grand Hall, and the cutscene didn't play like it should. The room appears to be in the state from the last cutscene we saw with Riku and Potato Sack Ansem. Leaving and re-entering the room from the front door plays the normal cutscene, and we can fight Maleficent. So it seems like getting to rooms early just leaves them in the state they were in during the last cutscene that took place there. Later cutscenes set the other rooms to the correct state to progress the story. Another example of how well structured these games are. The devs really didn't want anyone to skip things. As a final check, I beat Human Maleficent, then tried the Grand Hall door before fighting Dragon Maleficent. And it's still in the same cutscene state as before, where Sora starts invisible. So I'm declaring skipping Maleficent impossible. For our last fun fact, we can erase Riku Ansem's memory. The infamous fight with him takes place on a platform surrounded by invisible walls. But the walls don't go all the way to the ceiling. With some mods, we can actually fly over them to escape. It has one-way collision, so you could re-enter if you want. Or we can watch Riku swing at an invisible wall forever. A few KH1 bosses let you leave the area during a fight, and it will just continue when you come back to the room. So what happens if we leave here? Coming back in, the fight doesn't look like it's active anymore. And as we approach, the whole cutscene replays. And then the fight just starts like normal, like we just went back in time. But that's all I've got for you today. Our final tally is 2 impossible shortcuts, and 2 that are theoretically possible if we can find a trick to jump high enough. Library Skip seems like it has the most potential, since Sora can visually get really close to grabbing the ledge early. The funny thing about that though is, even if we could get up here, it's possible to not even have a thunder spell if you skipped Atlantica or Olympus Coliseum, like most speedruns do. So you couldn't even hit the rock in those cases. The Great Crest is a simple room, where we need to jump higher or find a spot on the wall to glide across. And that'd be a useful trick for both Hollow Bastion visits and all speedruns. So while I didn't find too much useful about it, that would definitely be the most useful place to figure out. I try to be concise with the useful information here, but I've spent hours just messing around in these rooms to see what happens. There's some small quirks I left out, but I tried to mention anything potentially useful. All of this testing was actually inspired by me just doing random things to maybe find a speedrun shortcut. I've always wanted to find some type of skip, and doing random stuff is a good starting point. KH1 is surprisingly well put together though, so sequence breaking wasn't really possible here. But the platforming ideas are super interesting, even if they aren't useful yet. Hopefully someday we'll find the missing link to turn these into real shortcuts. Thanks for watching!